Opinions expressed are those of the show hosts, not WSTU or Treasure broadcasters. Any reproduction or reuse of this program without the written consent of WSTU is strictly prohibited. Welcome to Paradox. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 772-220-WSTU. And now your hosts for Paradox, Dr. Ira Pearlstein and Dr. Leanne Talton.
Back in the studio again, and wow, that microphone is loud. This is going to be our last show for a while. We're going to take a hiatus. Hello, Leanne.
Welcome back.
I like your new glasses, by the way.
Thank you. Don't tell everybody about my obsession.
No, obsessed with glasses. I wear contacts. I have a lot of contacts. But anyway, we have a special guest today, and we're not going to do a rant. We're just going to get right into the show because we're honored to have Father Christian Anderson.
So where do you work, Father Christian Anderson?
So I work at St. Mary's Episcopal Church right here in Stuart, Florida.
And the people that are listening to this show locally, so not the podcast listeners maybe, probably know you from this exact radio station. Is that right?
That's true. Yeah. So Dr. Iras, I believe, your rabbi?
My rabbi.
Yeah, your rabbi. So the rabbi and I have a radio show called A Priest and a Rabbi. And we just got super original on that. And also a podcast like you both, and share the same producer in Frank the Tank, who comes on and helps produce the show. So yeah, so we're here every Friday morning at 9 a.m.
So how long have you lived in Stuart?
Working on 4 years.
You're making a big splash, because I know a lot of people that know who you are. And I think they know what you're trying to do here. And in other words, you're doing a good job.
Oh, well, when you're 6'6" and a priest, I mean, you kind of stick out.
They remember you.
Yeah. You got his collar on. There's not many collars in the world anymore. Like, there's not a lot, it's not as, the church is not the big show in town. So
what did the splashy priest do before he came to Stuart?
The splashy priest before was in the entertainment world in Los Angeles.
Tell us a little bit about that.
I was an actor out there for about 10 years and worked in TV and some soap opera stuff and commercials and all that fun stuff, and a lot of theater.
And the transition, why and how?
I was on probation, and the judge said, you can either become a priest or you can go to jail. And I said, no, I'm kidding. It's something that had been growing my whole life. And so I was like,
you couldn't wait to say that, could you?
I've never used that before, actually. I've never used it before.
It's very good, by the way.
Okay, I'll try that again. But so, yeah, it was just been growing my whole life. And then it was like, some people have that come to Jesus moment. It's like a pow. I had more like, it was like a flower that was like slowly blooming. And then it was like obvious that I would go to seminary. But in the Episcopal Church, you got to jump through all these fiery hoops that take years. So I had a lot of time to discern.
But when you say come to Jesus moment, it's the real thing.
Yeah. Not a colloquialism.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
So
exactly.
You were acting and going to seminary at the same time?
For a couple of years, yeah. So it was actually during my most successful years of being an actor is when the calling got really big. And then so I started booking this work out of state, out of the country. And then I started going to part-time seminary in Los Angeles. And then it got crazy where I was like, I've got to go full time in the seminary thing, because I was going to Fuller at the time, it was a pretty challenging seminary out in LA. And I was like, I can't be writing these papers in hotel rooms. And I was like, just getting anxious, and I got to go full time. And I was so surprised. I was like, oh my gosh, I want to go full time in this and leave behind acting.
So you're sitting around one day, or you're lying in bed and you have this aha moment. How does that happen?
It was just a slow drip. And it was just that moment of like, when I had realized I have to go full time. And I was like, if I have to go full time, no, you know what it was? There was a moment when I got a audition to be a lead on a Disney show. Anytime, any day of the week, I would have been so excited. It was one of those game changer auditions. It was like, okay, if I book this, I'm going to be good. And then I had to write this paper for, I think, Systematics or something. And I said, oh God, this audition is in the way. I was like, what? I was like, oh my gosh, something's changing here. This is weird. I think this is starting to get me. And then I realized, all right, I got to go full time in this. And
have you ever looked back?
Sure. Oh yeah. I mean, I miss the action. It's hard not to. I miss the action. I miss the big city. I miss hunting for your next paycheck. All that. You got to like the hustle as an actor. You got to like the hustle. If you don't like the hustle, if you just do it for the craft, that's not going to be enough. You have to like the hustle. So I do miss that. So we'll see. Maybe there'll be a marriage of the two in the future.
And how did you end up here in Stuart, Florida?
A buddy of mine who I just had on our radio show was offered the job first, and he turned it down because he got another job in Baltimore. And he said, you know what, though? I think I know the kind of guy you're looking for. And so this guy, and actually he and I weren't friends. I just interned at the church that he just interned at. And he said, I think I know what you're looking for. This dude who just got hired as the intern at the church I was just at might be your guy. And so I was in Ecuador serving a church out there. And this guy, Father Todd here in Stewart, Skyped me. And then it was just one of those God things. I was like, oh yeah, this is right.
So what was Father Todd looking for?
So in the Episcopal Church, since it's a traditional church, they have, so as you both know as residents, there's more and more young families moving here. So there was an influx of young families coming in. So they needed someone who was youngish. And then they also needed someone who can handle a contemporary service. So as an Episcopal church, we're kind of like the Catholic Church, where we have that traditional liturgy. And then they want to have the rock band and the screens as well. So they got to have someone who likes both, which is, believe it, it's hard to find in the Episcopal Church. So when Gray Maggiano turned down the job, he said, but I think I know a dude who loves this stuff. He's kind of evangelical. He likes this stuff. He'll put his hands in the air, but at the same time be really solemn, and he'll throw the smoke in the air too and be all traditional as well. And so that's what they were looking for.
And so you came here by yourself, or
At
do you
the time,
have a family?
Yeah. So at the time I was dating this beautiful gal named Anastasia, who's living in Jersey. And then so we dated throughout seminary, and then I moved down here, and then I finally proposed to her when I was down here. And then it took her a while to, so then we couldn't move in together, because you just can't do that in the church, even if you're engaged. So it took a while to get her here, and then we finally got married, and then she could move in.
So you lost the Disney part, but you kept the Disney name.
Nice, buddy. That was in the moment. That wasn't even scripted.
Is it because of Anastasia?
Absolutely.
Well, I wish that was a Disney movie.
Oh man, fact check.
So what happens next with you and Anastasia?
7 months pregos.
Whoa.
Yeah.
A little baby Christian coming around.
Yeah, baby boy, right around the corner.
So I imagine that you have a mission. You have a clear mission. That's what landed you here. What is your mission? What are your missions? What are your passions? What are you trying to do here in Stewart?
Well, one of them is just to build the next generation of the church. So, as we all know, as I said before, the church is not the hottest show in town anymore. And the rabbi talk about this in the synagogue too. It's numbers across the country. I mean, we're at a church that's healthy, which is nice, but still, it's still building the next generation. So I get excited about young leaders, lifting people up, to get excited about church, about God. And then I get really excited about the unchurched, people who are not in a church at all, but I still believe everyone's hungry for a relationship with the divine, even if they say they're an atheist. And then particularly for our context, I get excited about interfaith stuff. And then, finding out what are the big needs of, like, where are the lines of division in society? How does the church get involved in the healing of that? So racial reconciliation, economic disparities, all those things. I feel like that's where Jesus leads us into. And so how do we get involved with that through relationship?
It seems like society is always changing. And it seems with the advent of modern technology, Skype, phones, smartphones, computers everywhere, things are changing instantaneously.
Yeah.
The church, just like the synagogue, seems to be much slower to change. Do you find that difficult as the church is slower to change and you want to move things along a little bit more rapidly?
Well, there's always this, yes, but there's a push-pull, because I think sometimes the church can be countercultural. So when everything else is going digital, we're saying, but you still got to be right, as a rabbi would say, panim a panim. You got to be face to face with people. So it provides this place like, let's put down the phones, let's put down all that stuff, and let's just be together and communicate, because we learn so much and we grow together when we can be in the same space. We can hold one another's hand and pray. So nothing's going to beat that. But yes, we're way behind on, because listen, when people have an issue going in life, you guys know this, they jump on the internet and they're going to try to do the WebMD thing, right? To figure out and try to diagnose themselves through Dr. Internet, which is very scary. And then, so same thing with faith. And they're having discussions. If there's another shooting, they're going to go online and go on Twitter and go on these places, talk about this stuff. And if the church is not involved with that, there's just all that anxiety producing crap. Can I say crap?
You can say
Okay.
crap.
You can
crap.
say that.
Okay.
It's our last show. You could probably say whatever you wanted for a while.
You already did.
Yeah. So I said crap already. There we go again. So the church has got to be there. I remember one time the shooting happened in South Carolina, and I was, I remember going online, and the Diocese of South Carolina was nowhere to be seen. All these conversations, where was God in this? There's a shooting at a church, and the Diocese of South Carolina, the Episcopal Diocese, and a lot of other dioceses like the Catholic Church or other churches were nowhere to be seen talking about this. And people want answers. So yes, I think it's important for us we have to put money behind it. We have to put personnel behind it. We have to hire the people who know how to do this stuff, how to be effective on all the different social media platforms, how to be involved with the digital church.
But there's one thing that you do and that we do, and I think we all do it well. And that is we relate to the human factor and the human condition, because we actually listen to people, we talk to people, we put our hands out, and we care about people, and we touch people. And that emotional connection is something that you can't get through social media.
That's extremely well put. That's true.
So we are going to get started with the meat of our show. And I just want to let our listeners know that our goal in designing this last show before we take a hiatus was to try to make it more of a discussion. And I hope that we're able to do that. I think that the interesting thing about talking about spirituality and medicine, which is what we're here to do today for our show, Physician, Heal Thyself is the name of the show. The difficult thing is that there are some facts regarding spirituality and medicine, but this is sort of a newer discussion that we're now having in medicine and I guess in the community. And so, we scripted the show kind of, but there's not much to go off of. So in medicine, it's not true unless we studied it, right? It's not a fact unless we can prove that it's been replicated and reproduced. And this is exactly what faith and spirituality can't do. Right. Okay. So anyway, we're going to muddle along.
You mean there's no evidence-based spirituality, Leanne?
I guess it depends on who you ask. So anyway, okay, so let's get started. So our last guest on the show represented hospice, and we spoke a lot about the role of spirituality in end-of-life care. We interviewed these guests. We talk about how the care team in a hospice setting always involves spiritual, priests, rabbis, ministers, people that are important to the spirituality of the individual patient. Father Christian, my question for you is, what do you think or hope is the role of spirituality in middle of life care, right? Because in other words, in medicine, we are all plugged into the idea that at the end of life, people have spiritual hangups that need to be resolved. But I would beg to say that we are having spiritual hangups all throughout life. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and another addition to that too is the preparing for retirement spiritual, that part about so I'm about to retire and now my life is going to change dramatically. So what does that mean spiritually for me? Because that's a big change, which I don't think we prepare well as a society. We prepare well for the financial part of it, of how I can be financially ready for retirement. But what does this mean that I might move out of my home? I might move into I'm going to move to Florida and move to a gated community. And then I'm getting older though. My body's not working and I'm losing friends and all my friends are back at home. And now I can't go play golf because my knees are shot. And then my spouse just died. And where is God in the midst of all this, right? We don't prepare ourselves for all that big change. For a middle life crisis, it's and you're talking more just from a spiritual standpoint.
Yeah. I mean, because this is the thing. I think all physicians are prepared when we walk into the bedside of a dying patient that God's going to enter this conversation. But I think what patients are telling us is that God's been a part of the conversation all along, but physicians aren't necessarily having that conversation. Do you feel that from people? I mean, I know that you're not necessarily sitting down asking about the relationship between patients and their physicians, but I imagine it comes up.
Yes. I think that, of course, I'm going to be biased, but from my own experience, that if a physician, I would never expect a physician to actually talk about spirituality, but if there is never ever, but just because it just seems that it's on that would be the left side of the brain. Right.
But we do.
But you do. That's good. But so I've had a therapist, right? And so the therapist knows I'm a priest and I start talking about faith and the therapist will follow my lead
Mm-hmm.
right? And so then she can start she's not like she's sharing her faith, but it's kind of like wink, wink. She's talking about God in a way where it's like, oh, you clearly have faith and you clearly go to church, but she's doing it in a way where she's following my lead. So she's staying in my world. So she's not making about her faith, but my faith. And how does this help Christian figure this issue out that he's got going on? So I think that's like I put out the feelers. She takes it. There's an invitation. And now she starts speaking my lingo because it's about my care.
So this is a perfect lead-in for some facts. Okay, so in preparation for this show, I was looking at articles and editorials published in medical journals talking about, have we ever quantified what it is that people think or are looking for? And so here's some facts I found out. 9 out of 10 physicians believe it is important to discuss spiritual or religion issues when patients bring it up. That's that feels good.
And I had no idea it was going to be that high.
Yeah. 5 out of 10 physicians bring it up purposely in a patient interview, and 1 out of 10 physicians bring up their personal religious beliefs in patient interviews. 4 out of 5 physicians rarely or never pray with patients. Physicians who identified themselves as strongly religious were more than twice likely to bring up religion, regardless of the type of religion they practiced. 83% of patients in a family practice setting wanted physicians to ask about their spiritual beliefs in at least some circumstances. And among those who wanted to discuss spirituality, 87% indicated that the most important reason for discussion was the desire for physician-patient understanding. I think that means they felt like it was part of relationship building between them and their physician.
Those are some interesting facts. And I want to throw in 2 comments to kind of lead this off. Leanne, you and I both have worked for large corporate medical practices. Do you find that large corporate medical practices, have you done any research or reading that says that they discourage talking about religion and God and praying with patients because it's not on the corporate agenda? That's point number 1. And point number 2 is, if this country ever went to a single payer system, a Medicare for all, where we're all working for the federal government, then do we have to worry about talking about it because of the separation of church and state?
Well, so I think the biggest barrier, in my opinion, for talking about any issues related to beliefs, whether they're spiritual beliefs or any other kind of beliefs, is a time factor. So in that way, I think that institutions automatically discourage these types of discussions because they're lengthy. When you are ticking down the minutes sitting in front of a patient who's taking a long time to describe their symptoms, the last thing you want to bring up is how they feel about God. I mean, that's a big discussion. So I think that corporations are going to automatically discourage it. Do I remember receiving any message from the corporations I ever worked for? No. In fact, I was trained at a Catholic institution. So that's interesting because faith and spirituality and medicine would come up because there are certain things we weren't allowed to do, right? We weren't allowed to prescribe birth control. We weren't allowed to participate in abortions, which, from a training perspective was a challenge depending on the circumstance, because we were also serving a patient population that was childbearing age and, had questions about this and may not have shared the same beliefs of the system I worked for. So, I think that even in that setting, I'm not sure that I was being encouraged to develop a spiritual based conversation with patients ever by the corporation. I mean, it was almost like they weren't talking about it. No one's talking. In fact, no one's talking about it, right? Like, that's the whole point, is that there are not a lot of facts coming from data, from research or any other institution to say, how are we supposed to embark on these conversations?
But I wonder if we did talk about it earlier and we realized earlier on that patients who had strong religious beliefs were more likely to accept news about a bad illness, a terminal illness. They're more at peace with themselves. They have more of a inner peace because they have a higher power to turn to would it make, and this is not why I'm saying this, but ultimately, would it make our job and our future encounters with those patients easier to deal with because we brought it up early on and we realized that they were more comfortable with their illness than we ever thought they were because they did seek that higher power for guidance.
I think that is 100% accurate. I mean, these facts that I just quoted said that physicians who identified as themselves being strongly religious are more likely to talk about it. And I think, I plan to discuss later on in the group, like maybe it's because we, as people, as humans who are also seeking spiritual guidance, as, we're physicians, but we're humans first, that maybe we feel unqualified to talk about that kind of thing with patients. I don't know. I
Well,
mean,
it's such a personal faith. It's tricky. And you as physicians, though, on the sheet sometimes isn't to show you if they have, if they filled it out, what religion they
Sure.
practice.
Yep.
So wouldn't that give an invitation that if you felt like it was appropriate to, if it was you're dealing with something that's pretty chronic or end of life, that for you to say, I don't know, it would be up to you, but the person put it down. They felt comfortable saying that they're an Episcopalian, they're a Catholic, they're a Reformed Jew. That if you felt able to speak about it, then but I think you go off their lead, right? I mean, would you ever feel
Absolutely.
comfortable you bringing it up?
Well, I think a lot of times I'll ask patients, I will start by saying, are you a spiritual person? Right? Because automatically, sometimes people will say yes. I already know when they're going to say yes, right? I already know because of the context of other discussions. But sometimes when I say, are you a spiritual person? The very first thing that they say is a guilt-laden comment like, I haven't been to church, but yes, I believe in God. Yes, I believe in God's presence in my life. And so that in and of itself is an invitation to kind of dig further and say, well, why? I mean, we're here talking about anxiety. We're here talking about depression. And you just said that you think it's important that you haven't been to church. What does that mean to you? So I definitely meet people where they are. And I might give personal examples of myself, but I've had these discussions with all kinds of people of different faiths, and it doesn't seem to matter, right? I mean, that, right?
Right. I wonder if you two would have. So if I'm the chaplain who comes in there,
Mhm.
there's a whole connotation that comes in with I'm the chaplain, I'm representing the God industry, right? But there's something when you two bring it up, which is even more like the common man, like my doctor gets me. And so you say, are you spiritual? I almost feel like that person might open up more to you than to me, because they might have real guilt. They're like, oh, I got to tell this priest I haven't been to church forever. Where you're just like, hey, and you're not trying to, there's no strings attached for you. You're just trying to help them out.
Right.
Where with me, they might think like, oh, is he going to sit here and condemn me? Or is he going to try to proselytize? You know what I'm saying?
So from a priest, I get it. And from an actor, I get it, because you're telling me it's best left unscripted and we can do it unscripted. They expect you to do it. They don't expect us to do it. If you just joined us, we're WSTU 1450. We're here with Father Christian Anderson tonight. We're going to be right back right after this short commercial break. You guys sell it. They play our commercials.
Oh, your commercial.
Yeah, we've recorded our own commercials.
Welcome back. You're listening to Paradox. Today's show is called Physician Heal Thyself. It's me and Ira again in the studio, and today we are discussing with Father Christian Anderson, who is a priest at St. Mary's Episcopal Church here in Stuart. Before we took our break, we were having a general discussion about spirituality and medicine, and I think this is the perfect segue into an article that was from the University of Chicago Chronicle, published in the July issue of the Journal of Internal Medicine in 2005. And this study was sort of groundbreaking. This study was, I think, probably some of the groundwork to the development of a program at the University of Chicago that was trying to create more research and more discussion about spirituality and medicine. And this study said that a whopping 76% of doctors stated that they believed in God, compared with only 39% of scientists and only about 70% of Americans overall. So for some strange reason, doctors who are scientists believe in God at a higher rate than regular people and especially than scientists. The study cited multiple previous surveys that reported incongruities between physicians and general trends. For example, typically a belief in a higher power tends to decrease with higher education and higher income. Of which doctors typically are both. The study also reported that scientists specifically, especially biologists, tend to report a significantly decreased belief in a higher power, and the majority of physicians studied biology heavily in undergraduate studies. The typical people exposed to multiple faiths reported decreased belief in a higher power, and physicians obviously report greater exposure to other faiths than the general public, not just from patient encounters, but also because our colleagues are represented in higher percentages than the general public of other faiths and religions. The type of faith practice also seemed to affect how religious views affected their practice of medicine, with Christians and Buddhists reporting the highest impact and Hindu and Jewish physicians reporting the least impact of their own personal religious beliefs on their practice of medicine. And additionally, the type of medicine practice affected how religion affected their other dealings, with generalists such as family doctors and pediatricians reporting more impact than other physician specialties such as radiologists and psychiatrists. And this article was written by Dr. Farr Curlin, who was the director of the University of Chicago program on medicine and religion. Now he's on faculty at Duke. And he is quoted to say, "It would be good if doctors got up in the morning and when they were going to work thought, it is a sacred work that I'm doing, and even uttering a prayer, God help me do this well." He said, "It is not something that is talked about very much or talked about enough in my mind within the profession itself, but we are going to change that." I like this, Dr. Curlin.
I like it too, but I find it a little contradictory as to how a lot of us view religion and spirituality. I'm Jewish. That's no surprise. We talk about it a lot on these shows, but yet I have the Word of God in my inner office. I have a mezuzah on the door. I am the Lord your God is written in there. And I also have a prayer written by Moshe ben Maimonides, which is Moses Maimonides, who was a physician, philosopher, and rabbi from the Middle Ages. He was born like around 1135. So we're talking 12th century. And at least once a day, I walk by that prayer in my office and I read it. And he's responsible for the physician's prayer, which the gist of it is, may I find strength and courage in my pursuit of knowledge and healing, and may I continue to be inspired in my concern towards people in need. That's in my office. Every one of my patients sees that when they enter my office. So I think that depending upon our personal views, what part of the country we reside in, and our patient population, that these statistics are not necessarily steadfast, that they change based on the population in which you and I practice and our environment.
I'm not surprised by the study at all.
Why?
Because you all are on the front lines of seeing the brokenness of people. You're in situations where people walk in very vulnerable. And if you would have to be a robot to not have, or just lack empathy completely, to not feel people's pain and their struggle, and people who tap into that vulnerable part of their hearts, that if there is an inkling of spirituality inside you, I think it's going to be amplified, because you're going to be asking a lot of existential questions that, like I do in my line of work, of why, God, why did you allow this woman who was having this, she's a mother, she's got 3 children, and now she got diagnosed with cancer, and she's going to die within 5 weeks. Those existential questions are going to be provoked a lot more than a biologist, more than a scientist, because they're not dealing a lot of times with this. You're doctors. Some people go in it for the money, sure, but some of, like you guys, there's a calling you have to serve, and you care for others. And the best doctors are those who really care for others. So the doctors are really caring for this human being. You want to heal them, saying that prayer that you just said. It would make sense that you would have there'd be a high rate of faith and understanding of why are we here and why does this stuff happen, and for seeking support beyond yourself from a higher power to help you to be a healer. So it doesn't surprise me that doctors would have the faith and biologists and other scientists would not.
Makes sense.
Makes sense.
So in preparation for this discussion, I was thinking, okay, so in other words, we know we are typically, as a group, more religious than the average Americans. So why aren't, and we know, I just quoted, some stats that said that patients want to hear this from us. So why aren't we having these discussions? And so, there's a lot of responses to this, but I thought maybe one of the reasons is because we don't feel qualified. So my question for you, Father Christian, is I know that you do a lot of interacting with different laymen that go out to the community and speak about God. So, I mean, of my little knowledge of what you do, I would say like the lay Eucharist, so the Stephen ministry. How do you train laymen to talk about God? I mean,
the biggest lesson right from the beginning is you walk inside the room and you're training a bunch of people. You go up on the chalkboard and you just put listen. And then you walk outside the classroom and say that's your first lesson, right? So as you go as a lay Eucharistic minister, those are the people who visit people's homes and bring them the Holy Eucharist, or people who are just in the caring ministry, go to hospital rooms, or the Stephen ministers who say, your main thing is allow the other person to work it out with God. God is the whole thing of Stephen ministry is God is the cure taker. You as a Stephen minister are just the caretaker. So you're allowing God to come in and do the work. Your job is to love and to listen. So if you're trying to proselytize or trying to push something on them, you're just going to stall, create obstacles. So it's asking the questions. I think that the questions you were saying earlier in the show, where you're saying, what does that mean to you? So are you spiritual? So you start from the meta, you start real big, right? And like more of this macro way of looking at things and saying, so tell me more. So are you spiritual about this? What does that mean to you? How do you find that to help you with this situation? You're just asking empowering questions. You're not coming with a direct line of saying, do you know Jesus? So how are you going to pray for this tonight? And where do you find, God in the middle? I think that you don't have to be a professional. I think you just ask open-ended questions that are large enough for the person to get as detailed as they want, and you allow them to lead.
And so with that, I will say that obviously we take care of people all the time who aren't necessarily, maybe they're of a different religion entirely, but most certainly everyone other than ourselves is somewhere else in their relationship with God, right? So it seems like that might be another barrier, right? Is that you don't necessarily feel comfortable talking to somebody about a faith that you are not part of. So interfaith ministries you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, when I was trained as a chaplain, I was at a Catholic hospital, and as a chaplain, they train you. You're going in there you might have a Buddhist, you might have a Hindu, you might have someone who's Jewish, you could have someone who's atheist. So you go in, you're not carrying your set of beliefs in there. You are just going again to be a presence of listening and of loving that person. And wherever they go with it, whether they're atheist or whether they're Hindu, you're just being curious. You're just being caring. You're just being loving and wanting them, because when they tell their story and they talk about their faith, and when you show that you care about that, they're inviting this meditation on the divine and they're going to figure out some answers. And so I think you just being curious, and really, I'm telling you, the questions you asked before were perfect, because it's not, you sounded honestly, you were curious because you cared about them. It wasn't like, oh, I'm about to tell this person about Jesus, or, so if they believe in Brahma, or if they, if it's about, Allah, then you just say, so where's God in all this for you then? Or tell me more about your spirituality. How do you find it's going to, where does that work with all this going on? I think just be curious.
I listened to a TED talk years ago, which was, how certain talks you listen to can be life-changing.
Mm-hmm.
And I started asking people why they do what they do and why they feel the way they feel, rather than how they feel or how do they do something. Because when you get down to the why someone does something or why someone feels that way, it emotes passion in that person. And when you emote that passion, it makes it easier for them to talk about their feelings. And it's just kind of a trick, not a trick, it's an art that I learned from listening to this TED Talk years ago. And I find that if I want to emote from someone their feelings about their religion or death or anxiety about their illness, I ask them, tell me why you feel the way you do.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just sit back and listen.
Yeah. And, we've had other guests on this show, Mindy Fetterman and Planned Parenthood, who have talked about essentially the average public it might be very disconnected from the trauma that individuals that have had difficult lives have led. And, I always say that I've lived a charmed life. I had lovely parents who were married and, grew up without ever knowing that we didn't have a lot. And I accept that people are meeting me oftentimes in a very different place. And I think that allowing them to explain their truth and come from that place and is probably, giving them power again to kind of talk about how it is that they ended up wherever they are.
Sure.
Asking the questions.
And you guys, but the one question you brought up before was, do you have time?
Mm-hmm.
So do you have time? I mean, when in your practices, you guys do have time.
We do have time.
Because your practice is built to have that. For the average doctor, though, does an average doctor have that time when they come into a room, or the average specialist have that time to sit down and, let's say, I'm going to save 5 minutes or 10 minutes to check in with or maybe just 5 minutes, even if it's a couple questions at the end. Do they have the time? And B, do you think there's fear that if I do this, I might ruin my patient doctor relationship, because they're going to be like, dude, whoa, you just crossed the line.
And so, that brings up my next point, which is, I believe at one time medicine and spirituality were really linked, right? And so there was healing, there was physical healing going on with prayers, and we were, praying all the time with patients. And then sometime around the beginning of the 19th century, we started practicing fact-based medicine, and the shift went over to science. And I believe that with that came this kind of cultural shift that said, your personal beliefs as a physician do not belong here. Not just that they might not have a space here, like specifically, you may not talk about religion, that separation of church of state. And so I guess my question for you, Ira, is when you were training, so long ago compared to me. No, I'm just kidding. He's not paying for dinner tonight. What was the vibe? What was the vibe back then about religion and its place in the exam room?
It really wasn't mentioned. We really didn't bring it up. It wasn't even on the table. Everything that I do now has been an evolution in a career. It was all the science. It was seeing patients, treating diseases, and not really getting into a spiritual realm with the patient. Even on our show that we had, and we've had 2 psychiatric shows now.
Mm-hmm.
We had the remote show with Dr. Perry Mandanis, which was a brilliant show. A shout out for his podcast, Couch Stories. I just heard the 3rd episode, which was amazing. And then we had the show early on with Dr. Molly Ryan. We talked about that mind-body connection in both those shows, that diseases are not separate entities. It's everything is related, and everything can be controlled centrally by your thought processes. Certainly a patient who has a better attitude towards devastating disease tends to do better with that disease process than someone who gives up early on. So I think when you bring spirituality into medicine early on, it strengthens that mind-body connection and helps the patient heal.
So it would be then a natural assumption that prayer, right, with the patient could help reframe the situation. In other words, in medicine right now, a lot of us practice defensive medicine, right? Because we're worried about patients suing us for wrong decisions, and actually there's lots of studies that say that that's not usually why patients sue, that in fact, the closer relationship they have with the physician is what determines whether or not they're likely to sue that physician. And so in other words, like every other person, if you like someone, you're less likely to, put a lawsuit against them. So that being said, I think that prayer would be very powerful, because in prayer, that's when you're saying, this isn't your fault, patient, or my fault, physician, right? This is a disease that happened to you. Cancer, right? So we always talk about cancer as like fight the battle, etc. And sometimes there's a lot of blame that naturally occurs when you're trying to say, well, somebody should have found it earlier, or I deserved this because of the way that I lived my life. But in fact, it's just happenstance that these things happen to us. And prayer is a way to kind of say, well, okay, it's the blame doesn't belong to you or to me, and let's ask God for help. But we know that physicians don't feel comfortable praying with patients. What did we say? One out of 5 physicians are even a little bit likely to pray with patients, despite the fact that 40 to 60% of patients wish that their physicians prayed with them. So why do you think that is? Why don't physicians feel comfortable praying with patients?
Well, we are in a post-religious country now, right? So the numbers of just religion being talked about and religion being practiced is pretty low, right? So we're in a postmodern society where it's just not the topic. It's, I was in LA and I would tell people I'm going to church in the morning. People like, it's 2012 or something like that, right? They would laugh because it's like that's an archaic thing. So I could see where in any industry to say, do you want to pray is now a pretty rare thing. Now we live in the South. We're not in the Bible Belt, but still maybe there's more comfort in that. You just never know what's going to come. I get nervous when I have someone approach me and say, I want to pray with you, because I don't know where they're at on the whole Jesus radar. Are they going to get weird? Well, what kind of prayer are we going to be doing here? And you never know where this is going to go, because there's a whole different way of interpreting this. Are they going to come with judgment? Are they going to come with like this deep proselytize? Are they going to go pray for 10 minutes? Do they have strings attached? I think that the evangelical movement sort of brought this, and I'll say this as an evangelical Episcopalian, brought this fear that we have, especially in the States, that if this person starts talking about prayer, are there strings attached and they're going to try to do some kind of conversion to me and some kind of altar call at the end of this. Or they're going to try to proselytize. And I don't think we fear that as much with our Jewish brothers and sisters, because there's not that kind of undertone of evangelism that comes with it, right? It might actually be taken more authentically and be like, oh, I think my doctor just really cares and loves me. So unfortunately, the history, I think, of Christianity in this country has put people on their back heels, and they're worried about what are your true intentions. So when the doctor comes with that curious tone and already has a good relationship built, like you all do in your practices, you have the time to nurture these relationships. They respect you, they trust you, they know you're not going to proselytize. And you're asking the questions where you built the rapport, where you've shared a couple spiritual ideas, and then you say, and they've talked about prayer. I mean, you can go for it, but you guys have to read that. You guys know your patients. You guys get a lot of good time with them. I mean, how many of your patients you have to say, you had to put a number on it right now? What's the percentage of your patients that you would say, if I had to do it, I would try it with 15%, 5%, 30% of your patients that you think you could do it without the person freaking out?
Well, I think more than that, if I come at it from the perspective of meeting people where they are, I feel like I could, that about maybe 5 to 10 people want me to, right? So I think that the rest of them, we still have spiritual conversations without prayer. But I think that 5 to 10 people, it would just make their day.
How about you, Dr. Ira?
I think it's a little bit higher.
You
I
think?
think I know my patients well. I think my patients would invite me to do that. I usually, when my patients pass away, I usually attend their funeral service. In fact, I've been the pallbearer at several funerals of many different faiths. And I think I would say half of my patients would be very happy if I did that.
So how many right now would you feel comfortable within the next month bringing it up? Now, I'm not challenging you to do it. I'm just saying, so we just looked at the numbers. We've been talking about this. How many do you think it would be an appropriate and a good thing for you to do? Say, I really think this would benefit my patient if I brought this up, just to invite this for our patient-doctor relationship. But I also think it's good for them. It might bring a lot of peace and calm to them.
I think it depends what they're coming in for.
But right now that you're talking about, there, how many instances do you think, like, you know what? Yeah, that woman who comes in on Wednesdays, she might be really good for this. Is there anyone that comes to your mind?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I think that the challenge of prayer and prayer making both of us vulnerable, because I mean that's what it is, right? That's saying I'm vulnerable and you're vulnerable, and we're asking God to help both of us here. I do think it has to be the right setting, and I think that I would say probably 1 out of 6 patients every day is in some kind of a crisis. And I would say that the majority of those people would probably welcome prayer. But I don't know, I kind of feel like that's a relationship that you have to establish with them. I think that there are some people that come to me and say, I want to know your religion. I want it to match mine.
Okay.
So it
helps.
in all that discussion about, our culture being very reluctant to want to push beliefs on someone else. I think that even people that you know very well, you've had to at least hint at this in previous discussions for it to be welcome.
But it's like anything else. You set boundaries.
Yeah.
Would you feel comfortable discussing prayer in the office? Would you feel comfortable if I prayed with you in the office? Would that add comfort, or do you want to seek that form of comfort elsewhere?
I will say that
And you just ask them.
every patient that I've visited at their bedside, it in their dying days, that it somehow has been linked to that, where I feel like I knew their spiritual beliefs when they were conscious and talking. And, my parting words when I leave them is that I hope Jesus wraps them up in their arms and they feel comfortable with that.
So would this show affect how you guys might bring up prayer with any of your patients?
I think for me, yeah. And you know what?
I think so.
I also think that,
Look what you guys did.
You're such a teacher.
I know. Are you wonderful?
I think
This is
that,
great.
when I wrote this show a couple days ago, since then, I have been purposely thinking on my way to work the words
Brilliant
of
writing,
Dr.
by the way.
Thank you. The words of Dr. Curlin, right? That this is sacred work that we do, because sometimes it does get lost. And, I'll tell my mom without revealing any HIPAA violations about some of the struggles that I have. And she'll say all the time, Leanne, that's not your fault. And I'm like, I know it's not my fault, but she needs to say that, right? Because she's my mom and she loves me. And so that's what that prayer is, right? This is sacred work that we do. And most of these things I cannot fix. And I think that sets the tone for the day.
Well, maybe the world is just full of anger and people want more peace and comfort. And maybe we could provide that for our patients if we offered it to them.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you that as a parting thought for this show, this has become definitely an area of future study for medicine. There are most medical schools that are now incorporating spirituality as a dimension of human relations. Residency programs are requiring competency in the discussion of spiritual matters. So I think the pendulum is swinging the other way. We've figured out that people can't live without some sort of connection to higher meaning, whatever that is.
The last 26 weeks have been phenomenal. Leanne, you are an incredible co-host, an incredible friend. I can't wait to come back and do a whole new, brand new format of shows. Give us a couple months. We're going to reformat this show, we're going to be back out there.
And Father Christian, I cannot thank you enough for being a guest on our show. For everyone that wants to listen to you more,
come find me on YouTube. Your favorite Christian. We have a YouTube channel with my wife, and come find us there.
Thank you.